Hi and welcome to the Layer 2 SharePoint Business Data List Connector demo video. My name is Lars Wilinski from Layer 2. Layer 2 is one of the leading providers of Microsoft SharePoint apps in Europe with a major focus on data integration, collaborative knowledge management, social networking and cloud computing. We are also well known for consulting services in the fields of SharePoint, .NET programming and IT infrastructure for more than 20 years. Today, I will show you how easy it is to connect an existing native SharePoint 2007, 2010 or 2013 list to an external data source with all list features available using the SharePoint Business Data List Connector invented by Layer 2. In the first step, I will create a list that will finally contain external data. You could, for example, think of some kind of external data cache in SharePoint. To do that, we will click on Lists and then on the Create button. In this case, I will create a custom list, but you can of course choose any list type that will work for your data source. The name of the list in this case will be Products. To create the list, I simply click on the Create button and the list is created. To connect to an external data source, I will switch to the list settings. You can see that there is an additional entry within the list settings called Connect to External Data Source, showing us that the Layer 2 Business Data List Connector has been installed and is now activated on the site collection. Just click on Connect to External Data Source to enter the connection settings. In the next step, we have to configure the connection. To configure the connection, I have to choose a connection provider. You can choose any provider installed on your system, for example, ODBC, OLEDB, or any other .NET-based provider. If you are missing a provider in the list, for example to connect to Oracle, please install and configure the missing drivers first. You can also choose any of the Layer 2 data providers that are included in the product package. The Layer 2 data provider for SharePoint, CSOM, allows you to synchronize with external SharePoint lists on-premise or in the Microsoft Cloud and supports the write-back function from SharePoint to SharePoint. The Layer 2 data provider for OData can be used to connect with a read or write access to several systems that support the OData protocol, for example, Microsoft ERP and CRM solutions. By using the Layer 2 data provider for RSS, you can synchronize several RSS news feeds, for example for Facebook or Twitter. The Layer 2 data provider for XML is used to integrate XML data files or web requests in SharePoint. I choose the SQL Server provider in my demonstration here to connect to the table of the products. In the next step, you have to add a connection string to your data source in the field below. Connection strings are not specific for the Business Data List Connector. Almost any data source can be connected using a connection string. The connection string of a data source can simply be found within the vendor documentation or over the internet. In this case, I build a connection to the SQL Server with the sample database Northwind using the user ID BDLC and the password BDLC Demo 2012. After that, I click on the button Validate to validate the connection. You can disable the access to the security relevant information using SharePoint access rights or hide them within the web config or SharePoint secure store. You can also use integrated security to pass the current user's credentials if that's supported by the provider. In the next step, you have to enter a select statement to query the data source. In this case, I want to have all data of the table. After entering it, I click on the Validate button. I can also choose to show a preview of my data simply by clicking on the Preview button. And as you can see here, I have a preview of the results for my first 10 products. The data source field, Product ID, in the top left corner of my preview is obviously used as a primary key. I will add this primary key to the field Primary Key within the Business Data List Connector settings to safely update the items later on and validate it. In the next step, I will create the structure of the SharePoint list. To do that, I will click on the Add Columns button. What happens now is that all required SharePoint list columns are created and the database fields are mapped to the list columns in SharePoint by field name. The Check Mappings button shows you how external field names are mapped to SharePoint internal column names. Please note that changes of the column title as well as changes of the column type can be done at any time later on. Now I'm ready to update my data. The message occurring is only warning you that list items are possibly modified, and we will continue by clicking OK. We can now see that 25 items were added to my SharePoint list. The version we are using right now is a free version and limited to only 25 items. If you want to synchronize more items, please request a full-featured time-limited license or order the product. To show you that only changed records are updated within the SharePoint list, I click again on the Update button. And as you can see now, no SharePoint items were changed because no changes occurred within the database. The list can be updated on demand via the Action menu, via URL, the Update ribbon button, or using the API. You can also schedule updates to run as an automated job in the background, which is usually done every hour. In this demonstration, we're going to use the background update. The locked feature can be used to prevent data changes that could occur during a synchronization process, in this case, the background update. By enabling the write-back feature, changes made in the SharePoint list are directly sent to the data source in real time. The write-back feature has to be supported by the provider and requires appropriate user access rights on the side of the data source. In my presentation, I don't want to modify my data source, therefore, I will uncheck this field again. By clicking OK, the list settings are saved and the configuration is done. After doing so, I will browse into the list of the products, and as you can see here, this is my data within a native SharePoint list with all available list features. You can see that the primary key, in this case the product ID, has been mapped to the title column of the SharePoint list. I can change the title column by mapping the product name field to the title column, which makes more sense in my presentation. Therefore, I will simply remove the SharePoint column product name. To do that, I'll click on Lists and then on the List Settings. In the next step, I have to choose the column product name and click on the Delete button. I will continue by clicking OK and the column is deleted. What I want to do now is to map the product name field of the data source to the SharePoint title column by using an alias to change my query. To change the select statement, I have to click on Connect to External Data Source again and change the select statement to the following. After validating it, I take another look at my mapping. What you can see now is that the database product name field is mapped to the SharePoint title column. After saving the settings, I will go to the list and update it manually using the BDLC Update ribbon button. What you can see now is that the product name is set as a list item title column. Users can now work with this native SharePoint list as they are used to. They can, for example, create views, use the search, subscribe to RSS or change alerts, use it in lookups, export it to Excel, or use it offline in Outlook. They can set up workflows or add SharePoint-only columns for attachments or additional social content. To make it short, they can do whatever they usually do with a native SharePoint list. The Business Data List Connector closes many gaps that still exist within the SharePoint out-of-the-box data integration. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit www.layer2.de.